Hi, my name is Mark Burrows. I'm with the IJC. I've got a question for Brad Sham. A lot of people aren't familiar with what natural gas liquids are, and some previous speakers have talked about how crude oil moves through Line 5 and then through off to Sarnia, but what kind of trade is involved with natural gas liquids, and who uses most of that product?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I didn't go into detail on that during the presentation. So I'll repeat it for people on the line. The question was around natural gas liquids and just what is it and who uses it. So our pipeline systems are really split into liquids and natural gas pipe. On the liquid system, we would move oil, refined products as in gasoline, jet fuel, diesel, but we would also move a product that's called natural gas liquids. And it would be the full spectrum of natural gas. It moves in liquid form, not in gas form as it would in a natural gas pipeline. And within that is the heavier components of natural gas, so propane, and butanes, or some of the other heavier carbon natural gas components. The primary use in Line 5 is the propane aspect. That would be something that the NGL would be taken out of Line 5. It would be extracted, and the propane then would go to market, to the various markets. But it would ship as a liquid. It ships as a liquid because it's under pressure. If it ever comes out of the pipeline system, it would then turn into a gas form. And so it's a little bit different response. And with Line 5 is a light oil pipeline. It's one that moves only light oil and natural gas. It would not move heavy oil through that system. So hopefully that answers that question for you.
Yes. Thank you. Marcelo Graciano, still to see you. I have two questions, especially for the first three speakers in the panel, but feel free to address them. The first one is about the social risk, the indicator, and also the sort of the utilization to gift, and whether or not it could be, whether or not it's feasible, or you guys foresee to introduce more indicators on the socioeconomic side, such as whether or not a community is considered distressed from a socioeconomic perspective, or if there are other activities other than primary sector activities, because in the Great Lakes, well, fishing is not that big, put it this way, compared to the Gulf, for instance. And second question, quickly, is for the gift model, which is fantastic, by the way, with GIS-based tools. But how feasible would be in this country, in the United States, to implement a multi-model system based perhaps on an optimization such as the one described in GIFT, given the multiple actors that come into play differently from places like Italy or France or Norway? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll take the first question, which was about social risk. And you mentioned about looking at some indicators such as already communities that might already be distressed, and I think that is super important. That one slide that I mentioned where we talked about some communities are hit by multiple disasters. So for example, Bayou La Batre in Alabama, and this is a big fishing community, which I'll talk about next, but you know, they were hit by Katrina, and then right when they were kind of recovering from Katrina, they got hit by the oil spill. So I think it definitely comes into play. Also, we see that low-income households are typically strongly impacted by disasters, depending, again, where their source of income comes from. So yeah, I think there's a lot of indicators that need to be taken into account, especially when we're looking at how to make communities more resilient. And you know, with the fishing example, I knew that that was going to be kind of a stretch, because I know you guys don't have commercial, you know, not like we have in the Gulf with our commercial fisheries down there, but you know, maybe you can think of it as though you guys do have a large recreational fishing community. So maybe thinking about it in terms of that. So even if people don't rely on recreational fishing for a source of income, still if they can't go out and do those things, that's gonna definitely impact their mental health, and that will also tie into, seafood safety and issues like that as well. Who was?
Can you talk about the social index first?
Quickly on the social index, the way I see there are different ways to assess social risk. There are some metrics that could be developed based on quantitative measures. Could be the fisheries, could be agricultural impact for the Great Lakes industry impacts and so on. And then there are all of the other elements that are more qualitative, that are more around the perception of the risk. How do you live with it? And that's a completely other side of the coin that is a lot more difficult to assess, I would say. That's why we need both social scientists and ecologists and others.
See. So I'd like to make a general statement and then talk about the feasibility of the multimodal gift model. I mean, in general, when we talk about risk, we're talking about risk trade-offs, really. One person's profit is another person's risk in many respects. And sometimes you have socioeconomic risks that trade off against environmental risks. And so that's why it's such an interesting and complex issue to kind of get up your arms around. But what we found in the types of models that we've worked on, and I'm sure others that use these models, a lot of times the model, it doesn't get you the answer, right? But it starts the conversation and it allows you to discuss those trade-offs with different stakeholders. So, for example, we use the gift model to sit with stakeholders and in real time explore different options. Well, what do you think is important? To Jerome's, remember the formula he had where there were different weights on the physical index, the biological index, and the social index. Well, those numbers aren't static, right? And so one person may weight those differently. Well, let's change those numbers and see how the system changes. And so they're really good conversational and thought tools, as well as trying to come up with some good answers about transportation infrastructure, about where you build ports and rail yards, and what some of the impacts are of those. The feasibility question, I think the question was related to how feasible is it to use these models in an international context? Was that in general where you were going?
No, I like what you, so let's say that tomorrow morning.
Let's say that tomorrow morning, the administration gives you $100 million to actually implement the gift model.
Oh, this is an easy question.
Who are you?
Let's say that you win the Powerball, and there is more like the Powerball. But, and so you have the resources and you create a gift model that provides us basically optimization scenarios for moving crude oil in the region, optimizing, including risk and including minimizing environmental impact and so forth. From my understanding, very likely that the output will lead to a multi-model sort of scenario. In your experiences, how likely or how easily that multi-model scenario, even something less perfect probably, could be implemented given the variety of actors that come into play in the North American context, which is different from, I come from Italy, that's, for us it's easier, I mean, it's state-owned energy company and the Prime Minister can weigh in. Norway is the same, France kind of. Here we have multiple actors that need to be put together.
Yeah, and so to kind of reframe the question a little bit, I think there's two parts to it. Is what's the technical feasibility of actually building such a model that incorporates a whole variety of criteria that you can optimize on? And then the second part is you have different stakeholders who value different criteria more importantly. So how do you pick the right one and have those conversations? The answer to the first question, the technical feasibility is especially with $100 million, that's a yes. We have the framework and the computing capacity and the algorithms that we can build these multimodal networks with all kinds of different criteria. Of course, junk data in, you get junk data out, so part of it is a data quality question. But if you can identify good data sets, we could technically do it. I think your second question is a more difficult one. It's how do you then use those tools to have the conversations among multiple stakeholders who all have different interests. And, you know, I can only say with experience that we've had environmentalists in the room with freight carriers talking about carbon dioxide trade-offs versus time of delivery versus economic costs. And those are very helpful discussions, and sometimes you find what we would call the satisficing decision. So it's not optimal on any one particular criteria, but it satisfies certain thresholds of all the different stakeholders. So, but I'd have to think a little bit more about that in this context, but it's a good question, and probably the more challenging one, frankly, than the technical one. Anybody else want to?
Do we have any questions on the web?
Mike Murray, National Wildlife Federation. Question for Brad Shamla on the issue of shipping both the light oil and the natural gas liquids through getting pipeline. Just curious how common that is in pipelines in general to be doing the two different substances. So I assume then with natural gas liquids you have elevated pressures like you mentioned. So I'm just curious, what those pressures are like and if there's potential for increased stress on the pipeline, kind of going up and down, like higher pressure, lower pressure, that kind of thing. You have very different substances versus more dedicated lines for one or the other.
Sure, thank you for that. Yeah, so first, it's very common to run different commodity types in the pipeline. I think they typically go into the baskets, though. You wouldn't take a very, something from the light end of the spectrum and then go to the very heavy end of the spectrum. You typically put them in and bunch them in. So we do have pipelines that we would batch light oil and refined products. And in this case, it's light oil and natural gas liquids. The pressure is the same. There isn't big swings in pressure between natural gas liquids and light oil. You do get some pressure variation, but it's pretty minimal as you run that system. They're very compatible, and it's about 20% NGLs through the system. So you can think about it in terms of standing by the pipeline. About 1 day in 5, it would be natural gas liquids flowing through the pipe, and 4 days out of 5 it would be light oil.
Hi, John Allen, Michigan Great Lakes, Office of Great Lakes. Brad and Jason, principally, but any of you, Jason, you talked about moral hazard, and I found that really sort of fascinating concept as a former corporate guy and a guy that did a lot of corporate culture. You're really talking about trying to assess sort of the deeper side of corporate culture and how that culture is going to sort of manifest itself on the way it thinks about itself and its operational side. So what markers do you start to look at corporate culture and how that culture sort of seeps into the operations and the way it ultimately manages risk and the way that you then have to apprehend that and underwrite that risk, right? It's not a one-to-one relationship, so I'm curious how you start to think about that. And Brad, we've talked before about the way Enbridge is thinking differently about itself because of that, and maybe the two of you can provide a little bit of perspective on each of those kind of ways the culture influences this outcome.
Well, thank you for the question. So just, I guess, to repeat for the phone, the question was, what type of markers do we look for concerning corporate culture and how they factor in for moral hazards? So on the underwriting side, I mean, it's kind of it's a lengthy discussion, to be honest, in order to go through, just because, like I said, it's difficult for us to really to draw any hard conclusions, I suppose. I mean, you're really restricted to, do they have a proper risk management program and an enterprise risk management program? How apparent is it that policies and protocols are tied all the way up to kind of the C-suite? And I mean, every company has a roster of policies and procedures that you can find, especially public companies. You can go on, you can read them. So having them doesn't necessarily mean that they're being followed, and we're really looking for, I mean, because we're on the underwriting side and we have the opportunity to interact with people from the company and get data and meet with people who are more senior level. It's really the interpersonal part of it where we can get the best markers. Like, reading a document doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to happen, right? So you really need to meet face to face with people and gauge what type of effort they're actually making in terms of how they're actually employing these policies and procedures. And the difficulty, the other side of it that's difficult as well is, we see it mostly when it comes to mergers and acquisitions, is how you roll out a change in corporate culture to new divisions that you're taking on. Like it's a long process. It can take years to properly, migrate new divisions in. And I'm not making this a particular comment on any type of merger activity or anything that may have happened, but it's difficult to really assess it for us and to try to find some hard data that we can apply.
And I guess from an operations side of the equation, we are really focused on safety as being our #1 priority, and that's a culture that we've ingrained in ourselves, and in particular over about the last 7 years or so as we've gone through. We actually brought in a consultant to talk about culture specifically, to do a culture survey to see where we were at, and have taken a lot of steps to making sure that we're all aligned corporately. Within our organization, anyone within our organization has the authority to shut a pipeline system down. Anyone. Not everyone has the authority to restart it. But when it comes to a shutdown, safety is first, and they know that they can shut a system down at any time, and they will not be questioned for doing that. And so it's that culture that we've established. I will mention a thing that we spend a lot of time talking about in our safety culture is the human factors. Is what part does the human element play to things? And I think in a lot of industries like the air industry and others where you expect a very, very high degree of reliability, and in ours as well, you want to build in systems which you have the human factor at play, but you want to have systems working in the background to make sure if there's a human and there's a human error that can happen, that you may have a system in place to pick that up. So we have it in our leak detection systems in the control center where there's a computational model going on in the background. If they don't happen to notice something, the operator, there's a system that's telling them, we've done the math, you need to check this, it's there. In the field with the Line 5 Straits crossing, we have automatic shutting valves. So if there's a pressure drop, which the operator wouldn't see, or any other circumstance, that system will take action and it will shut those valves and it will cascade the rest of the pipeline down. So we are very sensitive to human factors, making sure we're setting people up for success and doing their job, and in building in systems to make sure that we have those redundant systems, multiple eyes and multiple systems, and using technology to make sure that we can operate error-free.
Right. I'm not in the insurance industry, but just a quick anecdote that happened this morning to me as I was on the phone with my insurance company. The challenge of finding measures and proxies that tell you whether a person or an organization is a safer bet or not is a significant challenge. As I'm on the phone with my auto insurance company, they were calling to find out whether my 17-year-old daughter still gets the good student discount, right? So some of you may know this. And I said to the agent, I was on the phone, they said, what does getting a B or better average in high school have to do with this discount? And they said, well, if they're good students, then they're going to be more responsible drivers. I said, you've never seen my daughter drive. It's a challenge finding these proxies.
This question is for Jason. You discussed how you analyze risk for, let's just say, for example, oil transportation companies, what you do. Those respective companies also assess their own risk. So in a situation where a company might be at a level where their risk is above what your policy could offer, can you touch a little bit about self-insurance and how that works into your policies?
Yeah, of course. So the question is touching base on what self-insurance means within the scope of the insurance policy. So I think the best example to kind of use here, certainly with the large pipeline companies, but as well as Class 1 railways, In a lot of cases, there's no requirement to buy insurance. I mean, maybe for a pipeline company because there's the need to meet financial requirements or for certain environmental departments and agencies, you would need it. But on the Class 1 railroad side, there's no requirement to buy any type of insurance. Typically on that side, they'll self-insure usually 25 or 50 million worth of risk, and then they'll come to the insurance company to look for additional capacity up to $1 billion, whatever. So, I mean, I was talking about how risk transfer isn't supposed to be leaned on as instead of having proper risk management practices, and really self-insurance or retention of your risk is the other option that a lot of companies have. And there's different ways they'll do it. I mean, in some cases they'll just take a $5 million limit, and they'll just perfectly simply self-insure. They won't put any money to the side. What we see a lot more often now is what we call it's captive. Anyone's ever heard of the term of a captive before? And essentially will act as a vehicle to help companies set up their own offshore insurance company. And it's done in Bermuda or Bahamas, and that's where the captives are generally set up. And it allows them to put aside money. They pay premium into it, but it allows them to fund for large losses down the road. And it's really where kind of what's happening now, especially in the energy space. It's no different than the super funds that are being put together where you want to have some money off to the side. A lot of companies, they have massive revenues. They can afford if they have a big claim, but it's a tough thing to explain to a shareholder when you have to draw down on your balance sheet to try to pay a massive claim and you have to put any money off to the side for it. So often for us though, the companies that would self-insure a degree of risk, those are the ones that we like to see the most, right? I mean, when you're taking a healthy retention of risk, it means you're comfortable with your own risk, at least in most cases. In some cases, it's you just want to save money. And that's, if you're just taking it and you're not putting any money to the side, it's really a cost-cutting measure. We look at that very carefully when we're doing business with companies and how much will allow them to have a large retention. I mean, they will be asked they'll ask us for large retentions. We don't always let them do it. As much as we want to be, have cushioning, we want low cushioned if there ever was a claim. We don't like to just let premiums get cut down to the base layer so they can take a big retention. We want to make sure we're actually funding for our risk and getting that adequate protection. So hopefully it touched on it a little bit. I mean, it's a long discussion to talk about how captives and retention of risk works, but I appreciate the question.
Hi, Detroit Intelligence Great Lakes Bureau, Marilyn Geist. For Brad Shamla and Rich, could you set the record straight? There's so many different reports about how many spills there have been along Line 5. How many oil spills, how many gallons have spilled since it was reported?
Yeah, so I don't have that kind of information with me. I think it's really important to know that our reporting criteria, both internally and to state agencies, really starts at the drops level. And it builds up to there to barrels and multiple barrels. And so we report all of our spills. I just don't have that data for you as to the number and the volume.
Yes, we have one question. Right, then from here, sorry.
I was just going to add, not on pipelines, but on marine shipping. There is great improvement needed, at least on the Canadian side, to properly report the volume spilled. There is no reliable database that currently exists in Canada to report spill sizes. So that's not on the pipeline, but I can tell you, shipping, it's a problem.
Yeah, I have just a question. It's on economic risk, and we don't really have a sort of a category in there, but economic risk cuts across a bunch of disciplines. So I guess it's a question for the panel. Do you think that, are we starting to move ahead at all in terms of speaking about economic risk more broadly so that when we say economic, we're not just talking about companies or industry connected to buildings? And so, for example, it was Larissa's comment about fishermen that got me thinking about this, because you think about Great Lakes, you think about fishing, but really tourism. And tourism is such a major piece of the economy, both obviously for the Great Lakes, but also from, in Montreal or the old St. Lawrence River. Tourism is massive, but also hard because there are so many moving parts. So I'm just wondering, you know, in the spirit of not having just a dichotomy between environment and economy, are we moving ahead on that sort of thing about seeing economic risk more broadly?
Who wants to start?
So the question was, are we at the point where we're thinking more broadly in terms of economic risk, not just meaning the impact to a company and connected companies, but to the broader community? From the insurance side, even though in a lot of cases economic, like the idea of economic risk outside the company, so if, you know, a company causes damage and it impacts a community, and like you were talking about the fishing community or tourism, a lot of insurance policies won't cover that, but it's 100% part of what our process is and always has been. I mean, as underwriters, as insurance companies, part of our goal is to map the entirety of damage that can result from an incident, whether it's going to be covered or not. So when we talk about something like economic risk, certainly it begins with the impact, the direct impact to one of our customers, but we would look at it on a broad basis. It's not that restricted for us. And I think we're at the point where, I mean, that's part of the reason why this is such a, you know, a healthy issue in the media, right? It is the fact that there is a larger community at stake that needs to be, you know, considered. So I'd like to think that when people talk about economic risk and they use the phrase, that they're actually meaning it on a broader basis, but obviously, yeah, there's going to be some narrowing depending on who you're talking to, I suppose, but I think that we're definitely moving in the right direction.
I can tell you that we're certainly spending a lot more time focusing on our risk and managing our risk and reducing our risk from an operations perspective. I think if you looked at our industry over the last 10 years, there's been about a 60% decrease in the number of incidents, releases that have occurred. That's still not good enough. Like we have a goal of 0 and really want to drive that down. And so risk is factoring into a lot of what we do. And for us, it means going in, and there are systems that we have where if we go in and assess an issue, and we'll shut it down. It won't be the insurance company telling it down. It won't be the regulators telling us to shut it down. We will, as the operator, shut it down to mitigate that risk, and then we will restart when it's safe to do so.
So I think here we're touching a little bit about the perception of risk again, and I would say that what would help, and I think we are going towards the right directions, we are talking more and more about these issues, and we're talking not only between experts in this room, but more and more we engage with the public, and it's very important that everyone hear about these are the trade-offs. You have all these values, ecosystem values, economic values in the basins, and to keep them, you need some protections. There should be clear objectives, goals by agencies. This is our governance. And I think to make maybe the whole product more reliable, we need to be transparent. We must have evidence-based findings that supports from the industry, the science. Everyone can contribute to that. But I think we are going towards the directions. I am positive about it. It is about understanding trade-offs. I don't want to have that big spill in front of my window, but tomorrow morning I have to take my car to go to work. So.
Question, I think we have Matthew. Sorry, Dan.
That's okay. This is actually, I saw you wave the mic off, but I'm wondering if you, Dr. Weinreich, if you could talk about the social cultural risks that you might be able to add to something like a gift model that you've already alluded to, but haven't spoken to directly. You might even mention a model or a proposal.
Sure. So Dale's question is, how do you take socioeconomic risks in its broadest sense and start to integrate them in models? And, you know, for example, one of the things that we use our tools to consider is whether say a port facility is in an ideal location, or whether certain shipping activities should be moved to a different port facility for either cost reasons or environmental reasons. Well, if you make that decision based on, say, environmental reasons, you might be putting some people out of work at the port that was originally the point. So you got to consider those types of things. So building those types of impacts into the modeling capacity, again, is is something we've explored. It's a longer-term goal, and to my earlier response, it's technically feasible. It's a matter of getting good data and tying it in. I think some of the work that Jerome's doing as well, bringing that in. So we have some proposals out there to do exactly that, to bring in these other factors in a very holistic way into these multimodal transportation networks so that we can do some optimization modeling, some stakeholder analysis, et cetera. I did mention cultural risk earlier, I mean, in terms of tribal nations and some of the cultural aspects there, those are important to consider. You have to kind of think about, okay, how would I capture that in a model the same way that I would capture time of delivery or shipping cost, right? And so that requires a lot of input from a lot of different stakeholders to kind of capture that data. Mechanically, it's easy once you have the data to put it in.
I have a comment and I guess a question for Jason on the worst case scenarios. My experience is in the chemical transportation and security industry. And when we look at the worst case scenarios, we take credit for passive controls, not active controls, as layers of protection, the Swiss cheese model. First starting point is, what's the worst case scenario, so you know the ultimate consequences that you might be facing. When I look at EPA regulations and Homeland Security regulations, they tend to do unmitigated worst case scenarios, but PHMSA or DOT allows credit for shut off valves, emergency response, operator training, things of that sort. So in my world, that's a planning scenario for emergency response and not a true worst case scenario. So the citizens ultimately don't know what a true worst case scenario is. So my question to you is, was the insurance company calculated?
Okay. So how do we calculate a worst case scenario? How do we look at a worst case scenario? So there was some of the stuff that I left out in my presentation, I think probably would have touched on it a little bit, but for us, I see the point you're getting at in terms of the fact that a lot of companies already have these protections in place, and what would it look like for one that doesn't? And the one thing that's interesting about this segment is that you have companies of various size and strength that represent. We had a slide earlier that showed, the number of whatever locations or the number of companies that were involved with this type of segment. And you have them of varying size and strength. So you have the multi-billion-dollar companies and you have the really small companies. And the larger companies move a lot more product. The larger companies also have a lot more financial strength to mitigate those exposures. The difficulty that we have is that, you kind of look back over the claims that have happened, the more recent ones. And in every case, there was already protections in place, right? But in some cases, you already had, even though they had protections there, a worst case scenario event occurred, right? I mean, there's always different circumstances that lead to the size of the claim. So for us, we do look at what a worst case scenario would be when we're looking at, like I said earlier, I was talking about topographical mapping and all that type of stuff, and we know what would happen if it wouldn't shut off. But in a lot of cases, it's more of a, what happens if, like you said, that it's planned. For us, we're looking at it from that side as well, because pretty much everybody that we do business with has a significant amount of protection already built in. So for us, it's really looking at, as opposed to, what if it wasn't there, but what if it all failed at the same time? So we will look at it from that side and use that to factor in on top of our pricing, just because, you want safety equipment to work every single time, but there's still a potential that it won't. So we have to build a degree of, flexibility in our rating to consider the fact that, if these layers of protection all failed at the same time, are we, what's the end result going to be?
We have more questions.
Hi, Faith Fitzpatrick from the U.S. Geological Survey. My question is for Brad. It kind of spans the risk to lessons learned that we'll talk about more tomorrow. But fishermen, both floating and submerged, and working with river currents in particular, but being in that environment. And then also ice and winter conditions as well. So has that been able to work that into the industry response and preparedness training at all? Because it's kind of a unique thing for the Great Lakes.
Absolutely, and I'll say we operate in all conditions. We're kind of our liquid systems in northern tier states and across Canada, 9 provinces and territories. And so we do deal with ice. We deal with rivers. Some are what would be considered, I guess, medium velocity, could be high velocity depending on the situations. They're nothing that would be whitewater rapid type of rivers, but certainly rivers that move very, very quickly, particularly in certain events. And so we're trying to build that all into our planning scenario. And certainly we've, over our history, have responded in all conditions. And, I'll use ice, for example. You get, ice becomes a very labor intensive because the ice itself will absorb oil. And so it's helping to limit the spread of it, but now you have to take the ice out. And you have to remove the oil from the ice, and so it becomes very labor intensive. But it does provide shoreline protection in the form of you have ice, you don't have that transport happening. And so you have to change your thinking. We have different response trailers for different scenarios. So we would have one specifically for a winter response, and it would have ice slotting equipment in there. We just brought over from Norway not boom, but recovery mechanisms for recovering oil in icy conditions. And it's a new technology which we brought over. It's first in North America, I believe. But it's really adapting and adjusting to make sure you're prepared for all situations. And rivers, again, are one where we put our equipment, where we put our boom